The weather in Ohio is starting to warm up, and so is the competition. The Reds and Guardians faced some interesting action this week. So did FC Cincinnati and the Columbus Crew. More importantly, the Cleveland Cavaliers are headed to the Big Apple for games 3 and 4 for their series against the New York Knicks. A chance to close out the series in the coming weeks when we talk next Friday, if things all go to plan. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Buckeye Sports Breakdown, a show about teams from the great state of Ohio. I'm Mahirson Hassan, and before I get to that, we've got a few quick hits, so let's get to it. And I'll start off with the Bengals, and boy, did they have a big acquisition this week, as Skyline Chili will be the official chili partner of Paycor Stadium. The Bengals have paired up with Gold Star Chili, Skyline's rival, for the past 20 years. And I would say, especially for myself, a Skyline Chili fan through and through. I lived in Cincinnati for 16 years. Skyline Chili is amazing. All right. And if you're a vegetarian or if you're not from Cincinnati, I'm sorry, but you just have to try it if you can, because it's absolutely amazing. It's what makes Cincinnati, Cincinnati. And you think about it, any venue you go to, at least when it comes to sports in Cincinnati, has the Skyline Chili in that place. Great American Ballpark, Skyline Chili. Now you can get Skyline Chili nachos there as well. So when I'm back in Cincinnati, I definitely want to try that out. You also have TQL, home of FC Cincinnati. Heritage Bank Center, home of the Cincinnati Cyclones. They all have Skyline Chili, and it's amazing. Everywhere you go in the city, Skyline's beating Gold Star. It's almost like Messi and Ronaldo out here, but nonetheless, great pickup for the Bengals. And hey, you got the draft coming up, so the acquisitions are going to be going up, up, up as this offseason goes on. Let's head up the I-71, and the Browns also have a little bit of an interesting move themselves, as they're going to have a new logo in the form of a dog. And they're actually kind of relying on the fans a little bit to draw the new dog logo. I checked it out earlier today. Some pretty interesting drawings overall. I want to see how it relates to the idea of the dog pound, the quote dog pound, as we've seen over the past few years. That's not a bad logo unto itself. It's kind of differentiating itself from, say, the likes of, I would say, the Georgia Bulldogs. I mean, they have a pretty good logo unto themselves, but kudos to Cleveland, really showing up. And hey, the fans actually get to do something over there. I mean, knowing how the Browns have played like crap over the past few years or so, I mean, the fans would probably wish, hey, I wish I was running that team. And now you got a chance. Maybe you got the chance to get the new logo, and anything's better than Brownie the Elf. That thing scared the hell out of me last year. It was weird as hell as well. Back to Cincinnati, and we're going to stay with the Reds. I don't know what kind of context that I see on my phone, I see here on Instagram, but Drake is apparently a Reds fan now, and it's interesting. I mean, Drake's from Toronto. The Blue Jays are there. The Blue Jays are doing amazing. But yeah, apparently he was wearing a Reds jersey, not a newer one. I think it was a classic, probably from the 1990s. But it would be interesting. Who knows if the Reds ever go to Toronto? I know they were there last year, and who knows? Maybe Drake makes an appearance in Cincinnati at a Reds game. I would love to see him over there. We'll stay with the Reds as we look at how they've played this week. 2-5, one win against the Phillies at home, and one win, an 8-1 win over the Tampa Bay Rays, currently the best team in the MLB. And I'll start off with the Rays because I remember seeing that on Monday. It was a good day overall, okay? It was a good day. I was filming Ohio Volley Talk. Great podcast. Check it out. I got it with Elliot Scully. And then my intramural softball team. Well, I'm not a part of the team. I'm the broadcaster of the team. You can see my nerdiness overall, but nonetheless, they got their win. It was the only win of the season, capped it off with a victory. And then I see this in my MLB app, and it made my day. 8-1 against the Tampa Bay Rays. That too, coming from Toronto. And they lost that series. The Reds able to take care of business. And then also against Philadelphia, 13-0, just laid it on Philadelphia that day. I'd actually also say this too. I was watching that game, just overall great. I mean, it feels like that when you're watching some Reds games, especially on the weekend. If Reds fans, you might know what I'm talking about here. But just that idea of sitting back Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, and they're beating another team. Defense is doing well, pitching is doing great, and Graham Ashcraft did a great job on the mound as well. It just felt like that on Saturday. Other than that, a lot of rough patches with the Reds. And we'll start off with the idea that we've seen the past few games and the idea of early game woes, especially in the first inning. Past two games, they've allowed at least 4 runs. We saw that yesterday on the road at the Pittsburgh Pirates. It was also the case against the Tampa Bay Rays. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, the score was 9-0 at the end of the first inning, because I remember watching that game on Wednesday morning, just like snippets here and there. I had other work to do. Pardon me, it was actually, if I can pull it up, it was about 8-0. That was the final score. And it just is 6-0. There we go. But to my point, it seems like the Reds need to try to get something going in terms of pitching. And I think it also goes to the point that they need to start getting better pitchers in the draft and try to work better in the farm system. Because you got Weaver on Thursday, made his first start of the MLB season. If I'm not mistaken, that was also his MLB debut. So congrats to him, but not the best outing to start off your time in the show. He got the chance on Thursday after spending time in Louisville. Stout was there on Wednesday, another good addition, well, good on paper to the rotation. Nick Lodolo on Tuesday allowed 7 runs in the first 3 innings, nothing in the first, and then 4 and 3, if I'm not mistaken, some combination of that. 7 in the second and third. And overall, there's something concerning about this. That being said, Hunter Green is probably the talk of the town right now in Cincinnati, and actually got some love because of the MLB. Got extended a $6 million, or rather 6-year contract, much more than $6 million. I forget what was the amount of it, but it was definitely, I think, into the hundreds. Simply put, a really, really good addition to the Reds. And from what I've seen, especially the past few years, where you're letting guys like Jay Bruce walk away, who really led in terms of hitting. And you look at guys like Yasiel Puig, although Puig did not play that well. Trevor Bauer, before all of the Trevor Bauer stuff ended up spiraling out. To have a guy like Hunter Green in Cincinnati for a few years is absolutely amazing, because one thing Cincinnati has struggled in doing is keeping star players. As I just mentioned, of the many guys who have walked away, I didn't even mention Aroldis Chapman. At a point was the best closer in the MLB, and guess where he was? In the 5-1-3, not the 2-1-2, not in LA, not in Houston, not any place that is right now a World Series contender. He was in Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's the one thing the Reds have struggled with. I think Hunter Green, with the right type of coaching, again, he's a great pitcher. He can throw amazing pitches. Had one over 105 miles per hour on opening day. But as he goes along, he's definitely got to mature. And I think by staying in the Red system really helps him out over time. So we talked about how the defense and the pitching has struggled. Has also been the case in the offensive side. They've struggled as well, at most 3 runs in a game. Face the Pirates tonight at 6:35 Eastern. That's not going to be much. This one, it might actually be going on once this episode is released. It should be an interesting game overall. This is the 3rd time this year the Reds have put up a 3-game losing streak. That is off of the 2 losses to the Rays and then last night's loss to the Pirates. They've never had a 4-game losing streak this year. So it will be interesting to see if the Reds can break the losing streak and get back in the win column tonight. Interesting pitching group to end out this time. You got Graham Ashcraft back on the mound tonight, Luis Cessa on Saturday, Hunter Green on Sunday. And after a few guys who are called up from the minors, that's what I like to see with this Reds team overall. A little bit of hope when you look at how this team is right now. They're 7-13, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, not like the Rays who are 16-3. But I thought back to how the Reds have started off the season over time. Again, last year with all of the fallout from the front office, They started the year 3-17, not too much motivation. So in that regards, this team is better. In 2012, they went 9-11, which is not bad, under 500. But again, this was a Reds team in 2012 that was absolutely stacked and were powerhouses too. Ended out the year winning the NL Central, and if it wasn't for a collapse to the San Francisco Giants, would have probably gone to the NLCS. So it will be interesting to see what the Reds can do. That's two against the Pirates. They did pretty solid, the Pirates in Colorado. So it will be interesting to see how this kind of hierarchy works in the NL Central, because these two teams have almost been the numbnuts of the NL Central. Again, you talk about the Cubs being good, the Brewers have been decent, Cardinals have always been good, but these two teams have kind of been taking their turn as basement dwellers over the past few years. And contrary to where we've seen the Reds taking advantage of the Pirates when it comes from time to time, we've seen the Pirates start to take some advantage over the Reds. So it will be interesting to see what's the drop over time. And I think the Reds should try to get back on top. And when I mean back on top, I mean try to get at least a win in this series. Do not be swept, especially in a 4-game series. Just does not sound good overall. And going to a series where they're playing the Texas Rangers, 12-6 right now in the AL West. I don't know. It's interesting to see the attitude around this team, because with the Rays, it was almost like, well, if we get a win, it's a freaking victory. And it kind of was. It kind of was, if you don't regard the past two games of that series where the Reds were shut out. And again, they had some woes earlier on in the game. But when you look at that matchup against the Rangers, would be interesting. I mean, the Rangers have been playing great. Start off the year with the sweep against the reigning NL champions and the Phillies. Again, I don't want to say this is a survive tactic. I want them to win the series. But if they take a game off the Rangers, I wouldn't be that sad. I wouldn't be that disappointed, because again, they're a good series. And you look at the Reds' schedule, there is a chance where maybe they get better competition. But I think maybe it's just better competition, one could say. I mean, after this, they've got the A's on the road. Hopefully, John Sadak and crew are not attacked by a possum in the middle of a game. Check that out if you want to see why Oakland's got some problems that is not just leaving the city, but nonetheless, San Diego. You got the White Sox at home. So a lot of interesting teams, and overall, the competition should get easier for the Reds. Just getting a little bombarded overall. And maybe they can be like 2012 and turn it around, but I think it would take more of a miracle than what we saw that year. And now on to the Guardians. Again, a decent week, a little bit better than the Reds. 3-3, went 2-1 on the road against the Nationals, and then 1-2 on the road against the Tigers. And I don't blame them that much for their loss to the Nationals. It was a close game down the stretch, lost 7-6, and the Nats ended up having two great catches in the ninth inning to stop base hits, which I think would have, especially base hits at that point of the game, would have probably gone for extra as well, would have definitely changed the trajectory of it. And the Nationals were able to do it great. Give credit to their outfielders. They did great. Tigers was interesting, and this one I think I was scratching my head over. They lost the first game. It was a doubleheader on Tuesday. The first game was midday on the East Coast, and then the second game was later. Lost both doubleheaders on that day, I should say. Lost the first of them on a walk-off. The second one was also a close one, 1-0. They ended up losing. And again, the Tigers are not the best, but this is a team that also played pretty decent against the San Francisco Giants, and a team that overall has been pretty good, I would say, when it comes to playing at Comera Park and led by the great old Miggy Cabrera. Back to the Guardians, though. It is interesting to see how they've played these games. Last four have been decided by one run late down the stretch. And as I mentioned, some of them even decided by walk-offs. It's kind of what we're seeing with this Guardians team, but at the same time, a lot of them are going for losses rather than wins, and they won a lot of close games in that stretch last year. Kind of the reason why they ended up being AL Central champions and ended up having the year they did. Even look at their wild card series against the Tampa Bay Rays, where they went really deep into extra innings and were able to pull off the victory. So it will be interesting to see what the Guardians can do. I would say this, and this is kind of a grab bag comment slash question. Clase, 6 saves in the season. That's pretty good. Pretty good overall. When it seems like whenever the Guardians are able to get that big victory, you're going to have a Clase with it. And I remember seeing this at the beginning of the year that with Edwin Diaz out for celebrating in the World Baseball Classic, is Clase the best closer right now? And I think the bigger question is, should he have a better walk-up song? I looked, there was not much from Clase's walk-up last year. So one couple years ago was all right. It wasn't like Narcos and Timmy Trumpet, which is Edwin Diaz's walk-up song. And of course, those guys at City Field go berserk whenever that dude walks out, even in a place like Queens, New York. But even with what we're seeing with Clase, he's got to get it up. Put some reggaeton, put, I'm thinking, and this might be a little cliche, correct me if I'm wrong. Gasolina by Daddy Yankee. Fire song. That is a really good song. Put that up. I know it's usually meant for hitters. And it seems like one that, like, if you got a dude that only hits dingers, that is his song. But I don't know. Clase, it seems like you got a closer on the mound. You've got hype going, right? We've used Enter Sandman. We've used a lot of these rock and roll type songs. Maybe put a little bit of a twist to it for Clase. I just thought about it. I would really like to see that down the stretch. And maybe we see it this weekend as the Guardians host the Marlins. You've got Plesac, Bieber, and Battenfield on the mound. Battenfield is one of the rising stars in the squad on the mound for the second game versus the Tigers. Only allowed one run, and unfortunately for this team, and we've kind of seen it throughout this year on the road, that was the only run of the game, and the offense couldn't do much down the stretch. So, but nonetheless, Battenfield playing well and Marlins playing well as well. And going back to the point about the Giants, had a pretty good series against San Francisco. And the Marlins have definitely shown their caliber this year. I'm really looking forward to Saturday's battle. You've got Shane Bieber against Sandy Alcantara. Probably one of the best pitchers in the AL against one of the best pitchers in the NL. It will be really interesting to see, one, how Bieber does at home, and I think two, how does this Guardians team respond? Maybe you get Jose Ramirez. Ramirez has been a little bit on the uptick when it comes to hitting. He's got a hit in the past few games. That is like every other game he scored. I checked his stats earlier today, and 2 home runs in the past 5. So that's my personal watch. Maybe you got Jose Ramirez. Again, you could get Josh Naylor. Someone in the mix could get some dingers, or you could say even little dingies going on. So that's MLB. And now you have some MLS action going on, and I'll just set the scene for you of what I was doing on Saturday evening. So picture this. I was helping out with the All-State Choir that was at ASU in Tempe. I took the bus back. I was checking my phone. There's my phone. I was checking my phone mainly for a couple of reasons. One, because I like to check my phone. And two, I was checking for St. Louis versus FC Cincinnati. And I talked about it last week. The Orange and Blue came into this game top of the league against a really raucous St. Louis side. Turns out the game's delayed. Starts up at around 7:45 here in Phoenix, so Pacific time. That's 9:45 in St. Louis, 10:45 in Cincinnati. And I have to give credit to St. Louis. That crowd was raucous. They waited out the storm more than 2 hours, and they showed up strong for their team, and they were definitely strong. Beat FC Cincinnati 5-1. So I see the score line, I see the score, and just the calls from Tyler Terrence that messed with my head. And so I changed the channel on my MLS season pass. And I turned on Portland Timbers versus Seattle Sounders. Cascadia Cup, one of the most iconic battles in North American soccer and in MLS, actually lasts longer than MLS as it started in around the mid 1970s. Either way, I turned it on. It was around halftime or so. I kind of disregarded the St. Louis FC Cincinnati game as St. Louis was up, I believe, by the score of 3-0 at half. So I'm watching what's going down in the Rose City, and I see a goal. Raul Ruidiaz scores another great goal for Seattle, and they've been on the command this entire game, and they've been on the command for this entire season, beating St. Louis 3-0. And then something happened. Dairon Asprilla, a guy who never scores, or rather does not score these usual tap-ins, scored a bicycle kick, and the place at Providence Park erupted. It was 1-1. Portland was back in it. And after that, the goals started coming. The final score of that game, if you're wondering, was 4-1 in favor of the Portland Timbers. And they only scored that first goal in around the 60 or so minutes. For 60 minutes, 60 to 65 minutes, Portland was a dead stick in the water until Dairon Asprilla hit a bicycle kick to save the game and probably to save the season from how Portland was doing. They came into that game winless and ended up beating their true rivals. There's a lot to make of this game, and I'll start off from Jake Zivin and Taylor Twellman's perspective, because they were preaching. They were almost going like they were in church, and this was a refrain by saying, here's the thing, we're going to be talking about this 5 to 10 years down the road, and people will be saying Portland dominated. And then we have to come in and say, no, they didn't. Seattle did, and then Portland started the flurry with goals, and they preached that Saturday night, also preached it Sunday afternoon in LA when they covered El Tráfico between LA Galaxy and LAFC. So you have teams that are coming off question mark type games, or as I like to call it, swing games. For FC Cincinnati, again, a loss to St. Louis means some interesting perspectives overall. One, how can this team rebound? You did not have Brenner on the field. You did not have Lucho Acosta. And Acosta, I think, is the one you definitely want to note. I think back to Hell is Real last year when Acosta was not on the pitch and FC Cincinnati did not have much of an attack going forward against Columbus. And then on the other side for Portland, 4-1, able to rebound their season. Can they get something going? It feels like whoever gets a result here, especially if someone gets 3 points, there's going to be an influx on how their season goes. Because, how FC Cincinnati has been doing, they've almost gone from this is a team willing to go to the MLS Cup final to we don't know about this team. And a win probably puts them back in the category of this team can go back to the MLS Cup final. And Portland on the other side, simply put, they're trying to keep their season alive and try to get into the playoffs. And maybe, who knows, knowing their history, they could make it to the MLS Cup final. So that's my commentary. And I think the other question and the answer we will find on Saturday is how much do these losses or wins matter? Because, and Taylor Twellman talked about this on the Cascadia Cup broadcast, that we're not going to consider Seattle like as a lesser team than what we've seen. And he also said that for Cincinnati. Now, I would probably argue the fact from what we've seen from other analysts throughout the MLS world on what FC Cincinnati is right now, especially after taking a drubbing 5-1, especially without arguably 2 of your top 3 players, and then your other third player, Brandon Vasquez, not looking too sharp out there. Nonetheless, Sergio Santos doing pretty well, 3 goals on the year. And it seems like, I don't know if this was in the plan, like when Sergio Santos was signed by Cincinnati last year, but I'm starting to have more confidence. Like once Brenner makes the move over to Udinese, he's going to be a solid fit over at the 9. But I know there were some people talking about it. And if there is another DP spot opening up, it should probably go towards the number 10. Lucho Acosta is an older guy. He's not going to be in the league for super long. It's either you take a DP or maybe you get like a center midfielder or something, but it would probably be the latter, this one that I would say that's more likely. Draft someone who has a possibility of being a number 10 or a winger or someone of that caliber and stick them at the number 10 position. over time, they'll become more accustomed to it and start to grow to become more multifaceted and more multi-talented. We've seen this with players like Frankie Amaya, who FC Cincinnati drafted first round in 2019, has had a pretty solid career. Now a starter, pretty regular starter with the New York Red Bulls. So I would definitely see if FC Cincinnati can put that foot forward, per se, in doing that. Now on to Columbus, facing Charlotte FC on the road this weekend. Had a 1-1 draw against them last year in stoppage time, and that was in their problem stint, their problem era, as I like to call for Columbus, where they were giving a lot of late goals to teams, and it ended up hurting them in the long run as they ended up missing out on the playoffs, just barely too, as they were in a battle with Orlando City to fight for that final spot. And speaking of 1-1 draws, saw it against the New England Revolution. And I have to simply say this, Lucas Zelarayan has been with the team for a while, but the more I've seen them play, and especially this year and doing this podcast, I've definitely seen how he's been able to affect this team, especially without Cucho Hernandez up top, because you see this so many times with teams where it's like you got the number 10, you got the number 9, they're kind of equal in partnership, but hey, they're both great attacking talents, and we've seen that in many oppositions, right? Diego Valeri and Fernando Adi with the Portland Timbers, Miguel Almiron and Joseph Martinez when they were both at Atlanta United. That's probably your best example of the 10-9 tandem, and we've seen that with Zelarayan, but I'm almost more convinced that as time has gone on, he is the team. It's not Cucho. It's not Christian Ramirez. It's not a lot of the depths. And boy, we've seen a lot of depth when it comes to the attacking position for Columbus. Probably has got the best depth in the league. Maybe LAFC's got better, but nonetheless, Zelarayan is a problem. He's a problem for other teams to try to contain because everywhere you go, he is there. Whether it's putting a shot up, whether it's running around on set pieces, whether it's crossing the ball in for an equalizer in the 8th minute of stoppage time, which we saw against the New England Revolution. 1-1 draw, but I was definitely a little concerned with Columbus's defense, mainly Milos Degenek. And again, you will blame him. He's going to be the scapegoat because the ball went off his right peg and into the back of the net, which was the own goal and the only goal that New England scored in the game. But it's even other points. Vrioni was able to get in behind for New England, and there were so many shots that were either just too high or just too wide, and you put maybe like a Premier League striker, maybe not a robot like Erling Haaland, but you put someone like, I don't know, Gabriel Jesus, Marcus Rashford, and that's a goal for New England just because of talent. I'm not taking away anything from Vrioni. I'm more in the case of saying Columbus got lucky. They got really lucky with how it was. I think New England could have put that game away, and they didn't. I'd also say this, too, for Columbus. They put a lot of attacks going forward, especially after Barrero was sent off. Of course, Bruce Arena's calling it phony baloney, and that was kind of the headline, per se, on how the match was going, especially from New England's perspective. On the call, simply put, I have to disagree with him. He went studs up on that play. And if you go, the thing is, had he not had Borrero not gotten a yellow card, you go studs up, there's a good chance that's a red. So he's lucky that was a yellow, although he would have been sent off either way. So give credit to Columbus and give credit to their attack. They looked lethal after they were down a man and they were able to get something going. Zawadzki with the goal in stoppage time. At 2, I should also mention this. It was the 8th minute of stoppage time. Only 5 were allowed. So this was a physical, foul-heavy game, especially down the stretch. If you're adding like 2 or 3 minutes after the original stoppage time. And this was literally the last kick of the game. As soon as the ref blew the whistle to resume play, game ended. That was game over. So kudos to Columbus. Took it against a really good New England side, currently on top of the Eastern Conference, sharing that with FC Cincinnati, who lost to St. Louis. That would be really interesting once the Revs and the Orange and Blue are shaping up. And then you got St. Louis, who's on top of MLS and also the West with 18. LAFC is in second. So we we're on to Charlotte for Columbus, that is. And similar to what we've seen with New England, the last two battles for the Crew against Charlotte FC, the other Queen City, was a draw. It was 2-2 when they faced off in Columbus, 1-1 in Charlotte. I talked about the Charlotte draw earlier, and it was the same in Columbus as the Crew were up 2-0 before a lot of the key players for Charlotte, including Andre Shinyashiki, showed up for Charlotte, scored in both matchups, and should be interesting should he do it again. Charlotte's attack has not been as potent as it was last year. Granted, they didn't make the playoffs, but it always seemed like they had some sort of energy going forward, whether it was Josuak, whether it was Shinyashiki. I mean, it almost felt like there was someone out there. Karol Swiderski, I mean, he was the guy for that squad last year. So maybe Shinyashiki shows up again, but I think in general, Charlotte's offense has got to show up this year, second to last in the Eastern Conference with only 6 points overall, 0.75 points per game as there have been 8 matches played. So we're moving from the Queen City, the other Queen City in North Carolina, to the Big Apple, where the Cavs are heading to Madison Square Garden to face off against the New York Knicks. And I talked about it last week. I do not like Knicks fans one bit. I do not want to see what happened after the Hawks-Knicks game after a victory of the Knicks over the Cavs. I do not want that to happen. But nonetheless, the Garden's going to be rocking tonight. First game is going to be up at 8:30 Eastern. And then you've got on Sunday, game 4. That's going to be at 1 p.m. Series heads back to Cleveland as they play on Wednesday. So 3 games in this stretch, one may say, before I talk to you again next Friday on April 28th. So with the series being 1-1, there is a possibility the Cavs can end out this series. But it would be really, really tough knowing how the Knicks have played and how the Cavs have played. By the way, if you want to watch the games at the Garden in person, you probably have to break your bank. It was around $220, at least $220 to buy tickets last week. For tonight's game, it has jumped up to $314 for a get-in price. You heard me right, $314. That's almost as much as my plane ticket to head home to Cincinnati. That's insane to think about. But nonetheless, when you look at the Cavs, you think about rebounding. You'd think about the guard play. But after game 1, it was definitely about the rebounding. In game 1, the Knicks beat out the Cavs 17-11 on offensive rebounds, 34-27 on defensive. And that's probably the more highlighting type of stat, especially on the defensive side, 34-27. Game 2, it changed to 32-23 in favor of the Cavaliers, 13-11 for the New York Knicks. So it would be a very interesting ideal to see, especially when you've got Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. I mean, 2 really great centers on the court. How do you rebound against this team that can definitely go forward in transition? And especially when you've got great guard play down the stretch. More on Brunson versus Mitchell later. But I do want to note this. I did not have this on my notes, but Julius Randle, of course, came into the series with a question mark, and I actually predicted that he would be out, and I ended up being wrong. Had 34 minutes against the Cavs on Saturday, 19 points overall, 10 rebounds. So, hey, give him some credit. Had a double-double. Josh Hart as well, 17 points, 10 rebounds. So a double-double for him. That too off the bench, I might add. So, but nonetheless for Randle, of course, has been a star player, if I'm not mistaken, was on my fantasy basketball squad earlier this year. So he's been in and around the game. He's been in and around a lot of things overall. Had a little bit of a better game in game 2, 22 points, and then 8 rebounds overall, 33 minutes in that one. So we're definitely seeing Randle back to his usual minutes per se. And he's definitely putting in the usual work rate. So I wouldn't necessarily be concerned if you're the Knicks to say, well, are we going to have Julius Randle or not? You're not. And probably for the Cavs, that's a good thing that we saw Randle at his best in terms of minutes played, because it doesn't feel like the worst is yet to come. Now, that being said, Julius Randle has put up much more points than 22 this year. So the worst could be yet to come in terms of points, especially when you have Jalen Brunson on this team. Again, Brunson put up 48 points against the Cavs during the regular season when they played in Cleveland. And he's also put up some pretty solid numbers during this as well. 20 points down the stretch on game 2, and game 1 also did pretty well with 27. I think the biggest thing for the Cavs, and it comes down to their guard play, more specifically, more than the physicality, I think it comes down to one man, Donovan Mitchell. He's a superstar. He's a sharpshooter, especially in the playoffs, knowing his history when he was with the Utah Jazz. But he's going to be taking on a role that he's going to have to start getting used to, and I think it goes to the fact of Ohio versus the world. He's the villain. Mitchell grew up in Elmsford, New York. That's about 25 miles north of Madison Square Garden. And he made a lot of trips down there in childhood. Whenever he visits the Garden for games, a lot of his family members are always in the squad. Hopefully, they'll be in the stands this weekend, hopefully in some Cavs gear as well, cheering on their great superstar as well from Elmsford, New York. So an interesting upstate, well, not really upstate, it's more like upper New York City area. But back to the Knicks overall. They're a physical team down the stretch, and it feels like from the opening whistle in game 3, this is going to be a team that is wanting to command. It just seems like, I almost think about it from this perspective. If NBA was high school, the Knicks would be that guy who always talks a bunch of smack. He's always like, oh, I'm the best guy at this thing. I can jump so high. I've got my A game on this test. And then he always never shows up. And it always feels like this guy is always blabbing in your face. But the moment he does something good, and you're like, all right, well, you're off. He's going to take off. It almost gives Eric Cartman vibes for some reason. I don't know why. Watch South Park, you'll know what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, that's the goal of the Cavs, is to say, you're not there, Knicks. You're not. You're not heading to the next round. You're not doing anything else because we've got a better squad. Donovan Mitchell's the one leading the charge, had 38 in game 1 despite some rather wonky physical play down low. Darius Garland as well, 32 points in game 2. Cassius LeVert had 24 in that game off the bench. I definitely want to see this guard play going on, especially in what has been a tight game overall. First couple of games, the under has been hit. So, I mean, I know Barstool Big Cat says life is too short to bet the under, go the over, but it would be interesting to see what exactly happens in this tournament. What comes down the stretch? Again, especially losing that game 1, the Cavs have to win one game at the Garden to go on. And I think they have what it takes. They played in the regular season, and the Knicks won by 2, 105 to 103. Close game. But I think this Cavs team, from what we've seen overall, from the passion in the squad, and I think it's what Ohio's meant to be. Ohio, it's Ohio against the world. You've seen those shirts if you're from Ohio. It is Ohio against the world. And again, the world will be in Madison Square Garden as the Cavs take on the Knicks. And when I talk about the goal going forward, what's the goal here? I want to win. I want to win most realistically, either tonight in game 3 or against the Knicks in game 4. And I think especially if you get them in game 4, both in game 3 and game 4, that is, this series is going to change in a heartbeat, because that game in Wednesday in Cleveland is going to feel like a clinching type game. And all those New York Knicks fans that were talking smack, even those that were in Cleveland after they were up early in game 2, they're going to be silent. They're going to be like me in a classroom. And that's what I feel like the Cavs have a chance to do in this series. When you look at the X's and O's, it's going to be really tough to try to bank at least one game in the Garden. But knowing how the series has gone, knowing how the Cavs have played when you know they have momentum on their side, and we saw it in the first half when they were up by 20 in game 2. When they have momentum, boy, can they take off. And I think they'll be able to take one of those games. I think they'll actually take tonight's game in game 3. I think the Knicks rebound and take game 4. So the series will be 2-2 heading back to Cleveland, and will be 3-2 when we talk next Friday. It also makes game 6 much easier because you don't have the pressure to try to win at Madison Square Garden, where you have a bunch of crazy fans who have paid an absurd amount of money to go watch a playoff game overall. That's their goal. And I think it's most likely. I'm going to predict that the Cavs are up 3-2 as the series heads back, and we'll head to game 6 as I talk next week. So that's another episode of Buckeye Sports Breakdown. Talked a lot on this broadcast or podcast, that is. Talked about the Cavs, talked MLS, talked MLB. Weather's starting to get warmer, at least it was this week. I think it's going to go back into the 40s and 50s, at least in Cincinnati. Still nice and warm here in Phoenix. So if you ever want to hop on and get some warm weather, hey, I'll greet you with loving arms here in the desert. But nonetheless, Ohio's great. Ohio's got a lot of things going on, and boy, is it going to be the case next week when I talk about the draft, give you an update on the Cavs, and as always, a little MLB and MLS action sprinkled in there. I'm Ahir Hassan. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and I will see you next week.